Good morning. Welcome to the University of Missouri St. Louis 2022 celebration of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. I am Dr. Tanisha Stevens, Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the university. Today, we join with people around the world to celebrate and to honor the legacy of a man who sparked the conscience of this nation. Dr. King significantly changed the fabric of American life. Born in Atlanta, Georgia on January 15, 1929, Dr. King was greatly inspired by the teachings of Henry David Thoreau and Mahatma Gandhi on nonviolent resistance, and used this approach to fight for the rights of others. A man of selfless devotion, King was an advocate of peace, dignity, justice, and was committed to equal opportunity for all. Because of that work, Dr. King was named Man of the Year by Time magazine in 1963, and at the age of 35, was the youngest man to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Unfortunately, on the evening of April 4, 1968, he was assassinated. Today, we remember his legacy. The university celebration is our annual event that honors the legacy of Dr. King and the impact he has made on society. Our theme for this year is Embracing the Dream, King's Dream in a Season of Uncertainty. Our country is in a season of tremendous uncertainty and change as we navigate our new normal. Dr. King believed that all of us are interconnected and that love is mankind's most powerful weapon for personal and social transformation. As you enjoy the celebration, I invite you to reflect upon this theme. And now, on to our celebration. I have the pleasure of introducing Tiara Marie Gray. Tiara is a local artist born and raised in St. Louis and has performed as a singer and dancer on stages in the area for several years. Her focus has been performing music of the African Latin American diaspora, as well as traditional gospel and African choral music. She has performed Latin American and West African style dance with prominent performers and currently sings with the St. Louis Symphony in Unison Chorus. Currently, she is pursuing music education at the University of Missouri St. Louis and aspires to teach choral music at the K through 12th level. Her interests are to study and teach abroad, study music at the graduate level, and travel to Cuba and Ghana where she can fully immerse in the musical styles of those countries. With a passion for working with inner-city at-risk youth, she realized they are often influenced by the destructiveness of hip-hop, rap, and modern music. She founded Arumbaye Musical Art to empower communities and youth by inspiring cultural identity and creating a cross-cultural exchange through exploring music of the African Latin American diaspora. Please welcome Miss Gray as she performs Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound high as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present
What an amazing performance and opening to today's celebration. Thank you, Tiara. I now have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Kristen Sobolik, Chancellor of the University of Missouri St. Louis. Dr. Sobolik serves as the 8th Chancellor of the University of Missouri St. Louis. With nearly 16,000 students, UMSL is the premier public research university in eastern Missouri and one of the nation's leading anchor institutions, promoting student success, innovation, and thriving communities. As the Chief Academic and Executive Officer, Chancellor Sobolik has enhanced the university's research and fundraising efforts with a focus on maintaining and building UMSL's areas of growth, strength, and excellence to serve our student population and develop the workforce and civically minded citizens of the broader St. Louis region. Chancellor Sobolik serves on a number of St. Louis area boards, including Greater St. Louis, Inc., Cortex Innovation District, the Missouri Botanical Garden, the Urban League of Metropolitan St. Louis, and BioSTL. Her accomplishments on and off campus prompted the St. Louis Business Journal to recognize Kristen with the Most Influential Businesswoman Award in 2020. As an interdisciplinary scholar, Chancellor Sobolik is a leader in and helped develop the Friends of Archaeobiology and Paleonutrition, with over 100 publications, books, and presentations. She earned her bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Iowa and her master's and doctorate in anthropology from Texas A&M University. Please join me in welcoming Chancellor Kristen Sobolik.
Welcome, and thank all of you for joining us today as we show our support for the work and values of the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a great American leader whose life was dedicated to service, to equity, and to an inclusion. More than 50 years after his tragic death, Dr. King's message resonates with me on many levels. As an individual who has long supported equity and inclusion, and as a chancellor who has promoted inclusive prosperity as our university's primary strategic goal and foundation. With inclusive prosperity as our foundation, the University of Missouri St. Louis is on the rise. This fall, U.S. News & World Reports again ranked UMSL as a Tier 1 national institution, rising 42 spots in the last 2 years to now rank number 118 amongst the more than 1,600 public universities in the nation. UMSL also ranks top in the nation for retention and graduation rates amongst its public urban comparators. As a premier public research university, UMSL provides access and opportunity to a Tier 1 education and then delivers on that promise through retention leading to graduation. And UMSL has done this while also decreasing student loan debt, recognized by St. Louis graduates as one of only 5 higher ed institutions in the state that is actually decreasing debt at graduation. In addition, UMSL has one of the more diverse student populations, reflecting the St. Louis region, that combined with our top graduation rates means that UMSL produces the most diverse college-educated workforce in the entire state of Missouri. This comes back to delivering on our promise and focusing on our mission of inclusive prosperity. UMSL also retained its standing on the U.S. News Top Performers for Social Mobility list, which highlights how well universities move students to the next economic tier. Only 2 Missouri schools made the list. Also this fall, UMSL was one of only 100 universities in the nation to receive a Higher Education Excellence in Diversity Award from Insight into Diversity magazine for demonstrating an outstanding commitment to diversity and inclusion. UMSL is a 5-time recipient of the HEAT Award, the only Missouri institution on the 2021 list, and the only Missouri institution to receive this award 5 times. I am proud of UMSL's focus and the hard work that our faculty, staff, students, and community do every day to realize inclusive prosperity. But there is much more that needs to be done, and I am thankful for everyone's help, guidance, and support as we work collectively and collaboratively on our shared vision, the same vision that Dr. King had, and the reason that we are all here today. Thank you for having the courage to live the values of inclusion that work to ensure we all share equitably in the prosperity of our region and nation. And thank you for participating today.
Thank you, Chancellor Sobolik. We certainly have much to celebrate at the University of Missouri St. Louis. Additionally, while we celebrate today, UMSL students are participating in the UMSL Dr. King Day of Service through virtual service projects, as well as engaging in conversations with community leaders to make positive and sustainable changes for the greater St. Louis community. We applaud their commitment to serving others. Dr. King spoke with purpose and authority to ignite the passion of an audience. He was also a scholar with many writings that have been studied over the years. What better way to honor him than through an educational scholarship in his name? In keeping with the scholarly character of Dr. King, I have the pleasure of introducing the 2022 UMSL Dr. King Scholarship recipients. Dr. King once said, "Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education." Students who applied for the Dr. King Scholarship were evaluated based on their community service and academic performance. We also challenge students to think about this year's theme and how it applies to their lives. This year, the MLK Scholarship Committee had the difficult task of selecting 2 recipients from a pool of very engaged students. This year's recipients include Donnie Tomlin, a senior who will graduate in May with a degree in business administration with an emphasis in marketing and a minor in psychology, and Jacob Bain, who uses his voice and platform to encourage others to be their most authentic selves and continues to be an advocate for LGBTQ+ athletes, all while working towards his degrees in psychology and sports management. It is my pleasure to present to you the 2022 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Scholarship recipients, Donnie D.J. Tomlin and Jacob Jake Bain. Each student will be given the opportunity to share their essay.
There is a lot to say regarding this current season we're living in. The word that best describes it would definitely be uncertain. Being a student while in a global pandemic has shifted the way I think and move through life. Balance has become much more important to me throughout the last 2 years, making sure to prioritize my mental, physical, and spiritual health as well as my academic career. The healthiest way for me to approach this essay will be with pure honesty. This has not been easy, nor is the outcome very clear. Embracing the dream in a season of uncertainty takes honesty, self-love, and determination. Since the pandemic started in March, I have spent a lot more time at home. This time has been spent mostly on school, exercising, playing video games, talking to my friends, and growing closer to family. I am an introverted person, one who spends more time alone with her thoughts than sitting and talking amongst different people. The best way for me to recharge after lots of socializing is to be alone and reflect on what took place. Either I get a natural high from the great time I just had, or I recover and reflect on something that may have been awkward, draining, or uncomfortable. Recently, I've been spending time deep in reflection. Instead of ignoring feelings that make me feel ashamed or uncomfortable, I gently step into them. I see my flaws and shortcomings as a chance to improve and become the best version of myself. I've been more focused on using the present to craft a better future. Part of this journey has included a shift in mindset. I've been teaching myself to think with an abundant mindset as opposed to a lack mindset. With these intentions, I focus more on what I have and my gratitude for it as opposed to what I lack. One of the greatest benefits of this way of thinking is that I have become more of a giver. One of Dr. Martin Luther King's most famous ideals was unity. He preached the idea that coming together would make the world a better place. Everyone's experience on this planet would drastically improve if the human race were to unite and simply consider each other. We should consider each other's experiences and help each other through them. Life is not perfect for anyone, but it can easily get better when you consider the next person. One great way to show consideration is to give abundantly and freely. When you give, it does not always have to be something physical. Oftentimes, the best way to give is simply by being present and spending quality time. Giving people my attention and time is one of my favorite ways to give. Simply dropping items off at a shelter is easy, but nothing shows that you care more than showing up to spend time with a smile on your face. When you smile and express a positive attitude, you are genuinely showing that you want to be there. Some ways that I've given back to my community include participating in clothing giveaways. I've done this in 2 different ways. Before the pandemic hit, my church family and I made it a yearly tradition to hold a clothing giveaway event at a homeless shelter in downtown St. Louis. We would spend entire evenings at this shelter, not just giving clothes and toiletries away, but by being present for those who needed it most. Praying, giving, and simply having a conversation with them are great ways to show care, respect, and come together. Currently, I'm donating excess clothes that I no longer wear to the Hope House in St. Louis. I go through my closet and round up clothes that someone could make better use of. Giving makes me feel like I'm getting the most out of life. I feel the most alive when I give to someone else. I'm helping someone stay warm this winter, and I sleep happily at night knowing that. The holiday season is very difficult for homeless people. Although Christmas time is about coming together with the intent to spread joy, this could have an opposite effect on them. During this time of year, they may feel even more isolated than usual. They may feel like they're being forgotten about as they watch most other people enjoy time with their families and buy gifts each year. As I continue to reflect on myself and my actions and push further towards the best version of myself, I have to remember the importance of selflessness. Giving back and putting myself in the shoes of those less fortunate are ways that I can stay grounded and grateful for the life that I've been blessed with. I must remember to humble myself in order to unite with the next man. I am merely a human being. I'm not above uniting with those who have less than me or at a lower quality of life than me. Just as Dr. King would want, we must look at each other as humans first. We cannot afford to judge each other based off the money in our pockets or the material things we possess, but by the content of our character.
In the fall of 2017, during my senior year of high school, I decided to publicly come out to my high school during a speech I gave for National Coming Out Week. Coming out would probably not have been too eventful for me had I not been in the process of being recruited to play Division I football, and had been very well known for being an athlete for the majority of my life. However, because I was being actively recruited by a lot of the country's top Division I football programs, my coming out speech quickly made national news, and the spotlight all of a sudden shined on me brighter than ever before. The pressure and attention, both good and bad, followed quickly after I came out, and I came to the realization that whether I wanted to or not, I was now going to be a role model for countless other athletes who were like me and felt like they did not previously have a place for them in sports, which allowed them to be themselves. Prior to me coming out, there was only one other football player who had come out while still playing, Michael Sam, who played at Mizzou and fell to the very bottom of the NFL draft just weeks after he announced to the world that he was gay. After watching those events unfold, I was more determined than ever to not allow my sexual orientation to get in the way of my dreams of playing Division I football. When I started to receive hate both on and off the field for who I was, I began to realize that this was much bigger than me, and that I was no longer just representing myself and my teammates. Rather, I was representing every other young LGBTQ+ athlete who was like me and never felt like they had someone to look up to for guidance and support, to know that it was possible to play sports and be LGBTQ+. I believe this is largely what set Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. apart from so many others, and is a big part of what allowed him to be so successful in spreading his message. I believe it was Dr. King's ability to take a step back and realize that what he was trying to accomplish was much bigger than just one person, but he was carrying the generations of discrimination and oppression on his shoulders of every person who was not afforded equal rights because of who they were. As my speech began to go more and more viral, I started receiving hundreds of messages on social media from other young athletes who were still in the closet and had heard my story and just wanted to thank me for being myself. It was because of this feedback that I realized just how much the power of visibility truly had on others like me. Sometimes all it takes is seeing others out there similar to you who are able to just be themselves and not allow their sexual orientation to dictate who they can be and what they can accomplish if they put their minds to it. Similar to Dr. King, my journey towards acceptance was not always easy. I was oftentimes met with hatred and fear from people who did not believe football was the right environment for an openly LGBTQ+ athlete. Whether it was signs in the crowd which read, "Football is no sport for fairies," or my opponents shouting slurs at me from the bottom of the pile like "Stay down, you fag," or even the Westboro Baptist Church showing up to the doorstep of my high school to protest against my very existence, my attempts to be myself while still doing what I loved was often met with conflict. And through it all, I refused to give up and give in to those who only wanted to see me fail. Not for myself, but for every other kid who was out there like me and once felt lost and alone because they did not feel like they could achieve their dreams because of their sexual orientation. I wanted to show others like me that we did not have to give up on our dreams simply because of who we loved. I hope I have been able to be a catalyst for change in creating a more inclusive and accepting environment for LGBTQ+ community and sports, so that the future generations of the LGBTQ+ athletes that are out there do not have to live in the same environment I once did, plagued with discrimination and hatred because of their sexual orientation. In my first semester at UMSL, I have already hit the ground running on continuing my mission towards creating the most inclusive and accepting environment our athletics community can be for the LGBTQ+ community here at UMSL. Since being hired as the Student Programs Manager for LGBTQ+ and diversity initiatives, I've created an organization at UMSL called Sports Are Universal, which aims to promote acceptance and inclusion for all Tritons who wish to participate in sports. The second Sports Are Universal event will be held during Black History Month and will aim to highlight some of the many Black athletes, both past and present, who have been trailblazing paths for future Black athletes to succeed both on and off the courts and fields. I am more enthused and ready than ever to keep pushing the bar forward in athletics towards cultivating the most inclusive and accepting environment it can be for all to thrive, and look forward to continuing to strive to emulate the philosophies and ideals of the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and achieve my dreams while doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, students, for your wonderful essays and commitment to service. On behalf of the MLK Scholarship Committee, I wish you continued success. This year, as the world navigates the complexity and uncertainty of today, we wanted to expand beyond our scholarship recipients and hear the voices of our students. Under the direction of Jacqueline Thompson, Associate Professor in our Department of Communication and Media Studies, Professor Thompson posed the question to her students and asked them to respond artistically to our theme. I present to you the voices of Benjamin Friedman, Elizabeth Daly LaFleur, and Katrina Johnson.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline Thompson. I am an associate professor in the Communication and Media Studies department. I asked my students who took my Fundamentals of Acting course this semester to create an artistic response for the theme, Embracing the Dream in a Season of Uncertainty. I hope their words inspire and ignite a world of possibilities as we enter into 2022.
A place where my soul fills me, a dream, a whole yet still dreams I seek. Through the pain I face, a dream I chase, a dream. A dream, a dream.
A road unknown. A seemingly endless road draped in darkness, illuminated only by a light far in the distance. The road, uncertain and unpredictable. The journey, treacherous and unforgiving. The distant light acting as your guide. Every step, walking into the unknown. Every step, bringing you closer to a brighter future. The only direction, forward. Every misstep a lesson to learn from. Every mistake, a chance to grow. The dream of a better future, fueling your every step. In time, you will reach that future. In time, you will reach that dream.
I'm tired, yet there's a glow in my heart that has a need to be quenched. I'm weak, yet there's a candle lit, growing into a torch. That flame is learning to know that it's okay to not be okay. I'm lonely, yet there's a sensation tickling through my skin, wanting to be spread to her people, the sensation of peace. I'm bruised, yet there's a warmth from this flame that flickers in the heart of depression, discrimination, defilement, and emptiness. I'm exhausted, yet there's a fire burning with the heat of justice and the scorch of love that refuses to famish away and be silent from depression, discrimination, emptiness, defilement, racism, and wickedness, and the loss of hope when there's a glow in my heart. I'm broken, yet silence will never be an option because there is a glow in my heart that repairs my soul and guides me to the light.
Hey, Tamara. I know you're fleeting, but could you listen? Visions of the hereafter. The turmoil the world had been dealt, even after. I still have hope for the future. Visions of the hereafter, to reunite and achieve the goals we started long ago. Though I'm not sure if I'll hear from you tomorrow, I'll plan for our rendezvous. Premonitions and precognitions, the unpleasant and the pleasant, visions of the hereafter. Could this mean I channel Phoebe some sort of psychic ability? Are these signs the omnipotent sense to me? Am I charmed or am I just delusional? Every night my eyes shut and REM comes along. I have no choice but to dream. There's no void that I can escape into, but an event that comes true. Am I charmed or am I just delusional? I wake and I say, I had a dream. You better listen. For my dreams aren't fictional. They tend to be quite real. These events I've experienced once before will occur in the time after the present, but I won't consider it deja vu. So tomorrow, I'll see you for our rendezvous. Hopeful, Trina the Dreamer.
When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark. Walk on, dream on with hope in your heart, and your dreams will come true.
Such power in the voices of our students. Thank you, Professor Thompson, and thank you, students. It is now my honor to introduce our keynote speaker for today. In today's ever-changing political landscape, Yamiche Alcindor has become a go-to voice in analyzing the most critical issues of our time for Democrats and Republicans alike. As the White House correspondent for PBS NewsHour, moderator of Washington Week, and an NBC and MSNBC political contributor, Alcindor methodically unravels the steady stream of breaking news to help her listeners and the audience make sense of it all. Alcindor's knack for following the story has taken her to places like Belgium for the 2018 North Atlantic Treaty Organization meeting, to Jackson, Mississippi, to write about the impact of racial inequalities and poverty in America. As a MSNBC contributor, Alcindor often appears on shows like Morning Joe, Meet the Press, and Andrea Mitchell Reports. Early in her career, she was a national reporter for the New York Times, writing about politics and social issues, and a journalist with USA Today, writing about criminal justice and fast-breaking stories. The daughter of Haitian immigrants who met while attending Boston College, Alcindor has written extensively on the intersection of race and politics. She's covered the impact of President Trump's policies on the working class, immigration, and breaking news coming out of Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. She's also reported on the presidential campaign of Senator Bernie Sanders, the legacy of President Obama, as well as how police killings affect communities and children. The recipient of the White House Correspondents Association Aldo Beckman Award for Overall Excellence in White House Coverage, as well as the 2020 NABJ Journalist of the Year Award, Alcindor has become a steady voice in journalism. She earned a master's degree in broadcast news and documentary filmmaking from New York University and a bachelor's in English, government, and African American Studies from Georgetown University. Please welcome Yamiche Alcindor.
Thank you so much to the University of Missouri St. Louis for inviting me to deliver this address as part of your annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday observance. I spent so much time in St. Louis covering Ferguson, covering all of the different aspects of your city and your state, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person, but you all know, of course, that we're all living through this pandemic, so I am still very honored to be part of this. And in some ways, I should just start by stating the obvious. The last few years have been awful, globally, nationally, personally, full stop. Now, Martin Luther King once said, the ultimate measure of a man, and I would add a woman, is not where he or she stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he or she stands at times of challenge and controversy. Now, I lean into that every day because we are truly living through times of challenge and controversy. Millions of people are suffering from the impact of the pandemic that has killed more than 800,000 Americans and infected millions here and around the globe. So many new variants are scaring us and not allowing us to be with our family members and celebrate the way we would want to celebrate on a day such as Martin Luther King Day. So many Americans are also, of course, mourning the loss of loved ones, of human interaction, of school, of work, of connection, of humanities and arts and school, of the chance to feel connections with other human beings. And so many Americans also, of course, are still processing the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th, an insurrection that really rocked American democracy. And nearly more than a year after the January 6th attack, we are still learning so many chilling details about just how American democracy was almost brought to its knees. Now, the House committee investigating the insurrection is intensifying its work and going after people who not only try to overturn an election, but also white supremacists, people who, of course, Martin Luther King fought tooth and nail against. People who hate the very idea of what America is, a growing and diversifying collective of people. And of course, Capitol Police officers here in Washington, D.C., where I'm speaking to you from, have called the day terrorism and say they are still living with that trauma. This is happening as some have tried to twist January 6th into a tourism visit and tried to make martyrs out of people who try to stop a rightful winner of an election from taking office. People who hate diversity, people who were against the very words, the very message, the very life of Martin Luther King. Now, with each passing day, we seem to learn just how close we came to a group of white supremacists to really doing even more damage. We've learned, of course, that they were seconds away from former Vice President Mike Pence's hidden location. We've learned that among them were veterans and lawmakers, police officers and real estate agents, business owners, everyday Americans who decided to have hatred for this country in a way that allowed them to break into the U.S. Capitol. We've also learned, of course, that they were coordinating ahead of the attack and were really, in some ways, solidifying the scary things that Martin Luther King and so many others in the 1960s were fighting against. And it all seems so scary, but in thinking about the life and legacy of Martin Luther King, I'm also fortified in knowing that even as we look evil and racism right in the eye, we know we can and will defeat it. Our country is as polarized as ever. Democrats and Republicans with vastly different ideas of how to move forward on any number of topics, including the very credibility of American democracy, the very credibility of keeping Americans safe. Tornadoes also, when we think about we've all lived through in these few years, tornadoes have killed dozens of people and destroyed whole communities in the South and Midwest. Wildfires have devastated communities and killed Americans on the West Coast. On the East Coast and the Gulf Coast, communities have faced a barrage of historic hurricanes and storms, and structural and institutional racism, something that was at the core of what Martin Luther King was fighting against. Something that for generations has ravaged Black people and people of color in this nation, leaving them, of course, now more susceptible to dying from COVID-19. The virus, the death, the economic tragedies associated with it have all exposed long-time inequalities and hit Black and Latino and communities of color the hardest, ravaging already vulnerable populations. And then, of course, we all had to witness the death of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, after a white police officer kneeled on his neck for more than 9 minutes. The nation is going through a sort of racial reckoning, one that was also, of course, I think going through and the nation was trying to get closer to after the death of Michael Brown in St. Louis, in Ferguson, rather. And we'll all in some ways try to figure out what's next for us, what's happening right now. But what we do know about what's happening right now and what connects to Michael Brown, to George Floyd, to so many others, we know that Black people are still 2.5 times more likely than white people to be killed by the police. That fact and the countless videos of people dying at the hands of police or vigilante figures have pushed Americans into the streets in all 50 states to demand change. But it's not clear, even now, as we celebrate Martin Luther King Day yet again, what kind of change can really happen. Black people continue to demand equal treatment under the law and equal human rights. People of color across this country, including Latinos and communities of color, are pointing out that in much of America, they're still treated like second-class citizens just because of how they were born. Yet despite all that we have endured in 2020 and 2021, and in these first few weeks of 2022, it's also led, these challenges, these controversies, have also led to some of the most consequential and important conversations in a generation. And what does it mean? I think after we live through all this, we ask ourselves, to truly be an American, does the country really want to live up to the promise it makes to treat every man and woman equally? Will a pandemic tearing through families and upending life as we know it pull Americans further apart or bring them together eventually? Because of our shared interest of survival. And what does it mean that so many are looking at these next elections as life and death and believing in conspiracy theories and false accusations of election fraud? What does it mean that so many Americans are looking at this election through the lens of fear? And how do folks, especially a Haitian American Black woman like me reporting at the White House and in Washington, D.C., stay lifted and focused on doing the work of exposing the injustices of America and pushing forward with resolve and a sense of purpose and personal joy? For me, it's about finding your purpose and being resolved to do your life's mission. In answering that, I have to think about a sermon that Martin Luther King delivered on April 3rd, 1968 at the Bishop Charles Mason Temple in Memphis, Tennessee, as a storm raged outside. It's titled, "I've Been to the Mountaintop." It's the last speech that Martin Luther King gave before his death. In the speech, he talked about God giving him the opportunity to live in a time period and that he found it to be a gift that he was living in the second half of the 20th century. He said he would pick 1968 and the years before it. He said if God gave him a choice, he would pick 1968 all over again. And he said because, quote, "The world is all messed up. The nation is sick. Trouble is in the land. Confusion all around." That's a strange statement, he said. But I know somehow only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. He went on to say, quote, I'm happy to live in this period because we've been forced to a point where we're going to have to grapple with the problems that men have been trying to grapple with through history. But the demands didn't force them to do it. Survival, he said, demands that we grapple with them. Men for years have been talking about war and peace, but now no longer can they just talk about it, he said. It is no longer a choice between violence and nonviolence in this world. He said it's nonviolence or non-existence. Imagine that those words are still, I think, so present, so important, so relevant to today. As I reflect on Martin Luther King's goals in a time period in which he lived, I can only imagine what he would say about living through these time periods. But I can imagine that he would want to live through these time periods because right now, as he said in his speech, the world is really messed up. We are being forced to grapple with this nation's original sin, slavery, and the cascading inequalities and equities that followed in the decision to steal the land of America from Native Americans and to build the nation on the backs of enslaved Black people without compensating them and with tearing their families apart. We are, as Martin Luther King said, being forced to reckon with white supremacy, not just the kind that shows up in microaggressions, Black people against Black people and others who have endured this, not the seemingly sort of polite settings, not at well-paid jobs or in institutions at higher learning, though of course we're having to deal with all of those different racism and all of those different discriminations, but we're also in this period in particular, we're also being forced to have to look at the virus of white supremacy coursing through every aspect of our nation and making us reckon, this moment is making us reckon with what kind of country we want to be and whether we want to have a country at all, whether this American experiment, this American miracle of democracy, whether it will really survive, it really does depend on some of the key things that Martin Luther King talked about. And in answering those questions about purpose, it really is about purpose and what it means to us. And I believe it will require that all of us put our talents, our skills, our time, our resources into bending the arc of the moral universe toward justice. Because yes, while Martin Luther King Jr. reminded us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but he believes it bends toward justice, I would suggest that it bends that way by applying collective pressure to make it happen. It needs to be bent and molded continuously for anyone to get any sort of justice at all. Journalism, I found, is my way of bending that arc of moral justice, of trying to get vulnerable populations and people who need it most to be treated equally. This isn't about Democrats or Republicans or about political beliefs. This is about whether or not we as human beings can live together and treat each other well. Whether we can have love for each other, which is in some ways the message of Martin Luther King and so many others who were working alongside him. And of course, I could not, in good faith, in good heart, mention Martin Luther King without talking about his beloved wife and civil rights icon, Coretta Scott King. She was the architect of the King legacy and the founder of the King Center, which she founded less than 3 months after her husband was murdered. And Coretta Scott King has so many powerful things that she told us and left with us over the years. But this is the one that really, I think, sticks with me the most as I think about this particular Martin Luther King Day. She said, quote, "Struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it," she said, "and win it in every generation." People, in some ways, often ask me, why did you become a journalist? And for me, it's a simple question with a complex set of answers. The main answer comes down to what the late Congressman John Lewis called good trouble. Of course, as we all know now, John Lewis, a civil rights icon, worked very closely with Martin Luther King. And on the day of his funeral, he planned that his last words to this nation would be published in the New York Times on the day of his funeral. And he wrote in part, quote, "When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state," he wrote. "It is an act. And each generation must do its part to build what we called the beloved community, a nation, a world at peace with itself." He went on to say, "Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble." And again, what you see from both Coretta Scott King and John Lewis are two people who are really giving us these words and these pieces of wisdom to say that every generation will need to do its part to fight and to become the beloved community, to bend that moral arc, to make the world a better place. And it really is in some ways calling all of us to use our talents, to use our minds, to use our hearts to better this place. And for me, journalism is my good trouble. Journalism is the place where I feel like I can be some good trouble, where I can make sure that I'm writing stories and interviewing politicians and holding people accountable in a way that furthers the idea of human rights as a central and core part and necessary part of our society. And I would implore you on this Martin Luther King Day, if you haven't found yours, to dig deep and to think about yours. And I should say, in some ways, said differently, journalism is my calling, and it's in some ways what I'm hoping that you have found or that you will find. It is how I've decided to chip away at the small and large injustices still faced by people all over the country, simply because of who they were born to be and discriminated against because of who they are, because they're Latino or African American or Asian or queer or transgender or a woman of any combination of those things, because of what we think of as intersectionalities. Now, my entrance into my calling comes down to a Kanye West song, and I should pause here for all of you that are listening to say that this was old Kanye West. This is when I was in college, Kanye West. This is early 2000s Kanye West. We're going to not talk about the current Kanye West. But I bring him up because Kanye West, when I was in college, he rapped about a young boy named Emmett Till. And as a 16-year-old, I should say, this is a song that I discovered in high school, actually. When I was in high school, I heard this Kanye West song, and he mentioned this name, Emmett Till. Emmett Lewis Till. And as a 16-year-old in AP chemistry classes, I had no idea who Emmett Till was, but I quickly learned. Bruised and beaten, Emmett's body was found at the bottom of a Mississippi bayou in 1955. He was a 14-year-old black boy from Chicago who was killed because a white woman claimed he had tried to flirt with her. She later recanted decades after his murder, but Emmett and his 14-year-old body ended up becoming a catalyst of the 20th century civil rights movement. He was one of the youngest martyrs in the fight for equality. Now, a Google search was the first time I saw his maimed face, and suddenly I knew what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a woman snapping a photo of Emmett's casket. I wanted to be the reporter asking his mother, Mamie Till, why she chose to share her suffering. And I wanted to be the journalist bringing America the hard truths of the ugly parts of the country. Emmett's disfigured face and the courage of his mother and the journalist who carried his story and carried his photo onto the front pages of African American publications, including Jet Magazine, they asked me to be a professional witness, and I complied. Now, 8 years to the date after Emmett Till's murder, some 250,000 people gathered in Washington for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And in that speech, Dr. King said something that is still in some ways very, very true to this day. He said the Negro is still not free. The life of the Negro is sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and chains of discrimination. The Negro, he said, lives in a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. Those words are still largely true today, and segregation was the topic of one of my first stories. I started my career, as many journalists do, reporting on my hometown. My first byline came as an intern at the West Side Gazette, an African-American community newspaper in South Florida. At the time, I wasn't an enterprising journalist focused on social justice issues. I was just a confused 17-year-old who had spent the first years of my life visiting inner city homes in Miami with my social worker mom for Take Your Child to Work Day. And a bit about my family. My grandfather was a driven notary from a town in Haiti called Saint Louis du Nord, or North St. Louis. We have the same St. Louis connection here. My grandmother was a seamstress with a big personality and a huge sense of curiosity. In January 1974, my grandmother came to the United States. She was 62 years old. But she left everything behind because my family, the people who loved me before I was even born, decided America, with the dreams and hopes and opportunities that it offered, is where the next generation of our family should be. So my purpose, my core, comes from people loving me before I even had a name, before I was even in existence. And even more, the foundation of who I am is one of immigrants who believed in America's promise to welcome immigrants. Now, my mother, a fiercely independent woman who was hungry to learn, came to America soon after in June 1974. She was 22 years old. She now has a PhD and is a living example in some ways of what we can all achieve when we set out to do what we're willing to do, to be excellent and do the right things. And I watched my mom with her PhD be humble and compassionate and ask questions about people's lives. And soon after, I had my own questions. I thought they were simple questions, but they were in fact questions I have now spent more than a decade trying to answer. I asked why in my majority Black high school was I an AP chemistry class made up of almost all white students. Why did I have to be bused from the suburbs, I asked, into an urban setting to be at a magnet school? Why did some of my dearest friends who were not in those confusing AP classes watch me fill out applications to college, but not fill them out themselves? And who in the world was making these decisions? Who was in charge? Simple questions. Questions I've spent my entire career trying to answer. By the time I got to college, I sat where many of you are sitting. I was determined to be a reporter. Now, I should say that I did lead my parents on to believe that I was going to be a lawyer. But I was hooked on journalism. I talked about so much about being a journalist that my hairdresser at the time ended up hooking me up with one of the mentors that I still have today, a woman named Athalia Knight. She was an amazing and supportive woman who had a long time career at the Washington Post. Ended up meeting also through my hairdresser and through Athalia, an amazing woman, Gwen Ifill. Of course, the late Gwen Ifill was part of the first all-female co-anchors of a national news program. She was also, of course, the longtime anchor of Washington Week, where I now sit. It's surreal to think about. But my first memory of Gwen was sitting under the hairdryer and her encouraging me to pursue my dreams. And I was super nervous when I saw her again during a convention at the National Association of Black Journalists. I walked up to her and I said, "Hi, I'm Yamiche, but you can call me Miche." And I said that because I was so used to people not being able to say my name and so used to people sort of trying to understand how to sort of make me into what they want me to be. And her response, without missing a beat, was, "Don't let people nickname you." It's now been years since her death, and I think more and more about that advice every day. I think her words are about finding your personal moral compass and sticking to it, knowing who you are, why you're doing what you're doing, and to make people learn and how to say your name with respect. I cling to those words now as I anchor Washington Week on PBS, taking over, of course, the chair that she long held. It's a surreal, it's a blessing. And I've also heeded her language throughout my career. And it's also in some ways what focused the work of Martin Luther King, what focused his idea. He knew who he wanted to be. He knew what was important. He knew what was important to him. And he wasn't changing. He was, of course, compromising at times, making deals to get things done. But he knew at his core who he was. And as I was feeling, and I should say, for all those students who might be listening to this, while I was going through this discovery of who I was, meeting Gwen Ifill, I was also, of course, fielding calls from my dad, who was dumbfounded that I was not going to law school. We were in the middle of an economic crisis and everyone was worried about finding a job. This is when Lehman Brothers and so many other banks were going through economic troubles. And I, of course, had never imagined that I would be going through this financial crisis, but here we were. And my dad was pissed, frankly. He was pissed and calling from Haiti, but I was determined because I had found a calling, because I had found a way to be in my good trouble. And I ended up having a career chronicling people's lives up close, writing about the flaws of America, the complications accompanied with our founding ideals that say that everyone should be treated equally and have equal access to justice. I often say the things that make me cry are also the amazing stories that I've been able to write. So students in particular, I want to challenge you to think about deeply the things that make you cry, what makes you feel, what moves you in a way that nothing else does. Go after that thing. Go seek that thing out. And I understand, I should say, the financial constraints. I had to make sure that I was someone who was going to stay indoors. I didn't have a family that could support me in big ways. But I also wanted to make sure that I had joy, that I had passion, that I was doing something that made me feel alive. So I deeply understand the need to make a living. So my advice is to also be patient with yourself. Take a job that pays the bills. Move to the city where you can get employment, and don't ignore your life's passion. Just claw your way to them. Do what you have to do, but also don't forget yourself. Now, in the summer of 2009 and I should say in other years, I wrote incredible stories about people who were incredible. I wrote about a woman who was going to the ER for her primary health care for 20 years. I wrote about the death of Trayvon Martin and what it means that Black people can often be criminalized just for walking down the street. I wrote about the lack of resources in inner cities, an unfair criminal justice system, and people tired of suppression that gave the country, of course, the protests in Ferguson, where right around the corner from where you are, and in Baltimore, of course. Many in the country were surprised by the scenes, especially in Ferguson, of militarized police, of clouds of tear gas, and massive crowds of Black people demanding justice. But in fact, these issues had been boiling for so long before Michael Brown was killed. Really, they connect to all of the work that Martin Luther King was doing. And it was that trauma that I couldn't quite understand, but that I sensed early on in my initial questioning when I got into journalism. So I've written about Black Lives Matter, meaning that Black people should not be killed by the police unjustly. But it also means that Black people deserve to be treated with adequate health care, with a fair shot in the criminal justice system, with good paying jobs, and the ability to find themselves and what equality looks like for them. It also means not being allowed into it means also not just being allowed into predominantly white schools, like the ones I've attended and others, but also into neighborhoods and workplaces. It's meant thriving and transform. It also has to mean thriving and transforming those spaces, seeing fair resources poured into Black spaces and having the freedom to create wholly new spaces. Those same issues were at the heart of the protests that I chronicled after the death of George Floyd, when thousands of people gathered in the streets of DC to demand justice. Those same fears are also where I've chronicled the pandemic's disproportionate impact on people of color and Black people. They are also in the voices of people like Sierra Bates Chamberlain, a woman I interviewed based in Chicago who at one point had 4 family members on breathing machines fighting the coronavirus. Or in the voice of Ruby Quintanilla. She's an Amazon worker who works in a warehouse in Chicago who feared about catching the virus, but who also had to care for her elderly parents while trying to make a living. So though we've lost so much, we also have gained the understanding that journalism, through the pandemic, through the racial reckoning, through all of the different things that we've had to chronicle, and of course, as we go toward the midterms and another election cycle, journalism must be the medium by which we dissect privilege and expose the inequalities in this country and in this world. We must, of course, hold political leaders and powerful figures accountable. Journalism must take a hard look at racial discrimination and account for each sector of society and how it's impacted by our nation being founded the way it is. It was, rather. Journalism must also stand up for what's right, no matter if it makes people uncomfortable. And here's a reminder. Martin Luther King said this: "History will have to record that the greatest tragedy in this period of social transition was not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people." So to add to this, he also said there's a time when silence is betrayal. When silence is betrayal. So many people have been silent, continue to be silent in the name of being comfortable. The lesson of these times should be to call out wrong when you see it and to choose to continue to move forward with honesty. For too long, mentioning racism and calling out inequality as racism and racism has really been seen as the nice thing to do, the thing that trumpet in glossy pamphlets. And diversity has been seen as a sort of extra issue. But in reality, we need to know that we're not doing Black people and people of color a favor by lending their voices and calling out racism and giving them voice in spaces. We're actually making those spaces better. Inclusion and diversity has to be seen not as an extra thing, but at the core part of our society, and it has to be dealt with openly. And after the presidency of Donald Trump, former President Trump, it should be crystal clear that grappling with racism and having diversity through society and decision-making spaces is the necessary thing to do in order to properly care for the democracy we all love so much. Of course, I won't end this without talking a bit about my exchanges with the former president. In particular, I'm often asked about my 2018 question to former President Trump, one that I think connects to the work of Martin Luther King, but also one that I think connects to the future of racial equality in this country. I said to him in November 2018, on the campaign trail, you called yourself a nationalist. Some people saw that as emboldening white nationalists. Some people see the Republican Party, I asked him, as supporting white nationalism because of your rhetoric. What do you make of that? Now, the president, of course, called my question racist. And after that, as the virus ravaged through our country, we had several heated exchanges. And I've been getting the question over and over again, what's it like to go toe to toe with the president? How did it make you feel? What was it like for the president to say that to you? And my response is one that comes deeply from who I am, from my story, from my family, for how I got into journalism through the story of Emmett Till. I focused on my purpose. I was steadied by the hands of my ancestors who came to the United States so that I could pose these questions. And since then, of course, I've been called nasty and biased and all sorts of other things. But I have news for you. Each and every one of you will experience moments where people will challenge the very premise of your existence and your pursuits. Maybe an editor will tell you, like one told me, that you're not confident enough to be a reporter. Maybe someone will question your career choices or who you choose to love or where you choose to live. But I say press forward. That's what I do. That's what Martin Luther King did. That's what so many other people have to do. Press forward knowing that you have the privilege to continue to live in this world and continue to have the opportunity to dedicate your talents and your skills to making this world a better place. I, of course, feel like I am privileged to have the opportunity to be questioning powerful people. I press forward at my core knowing that I'm an American because someone loved me enough to risk it all so that I can ask those questions. And a note to aspiring journalists who might be out there, or to aspiring other folks, lawyers or doctors, but journalists, of course, are close to my heart. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't look the part or that you're not confident enough to realize your dreams. Don't let anyone tell you you're not confident enough to realize your dreams or that you don't look the part. Be too busy going after your life's mission to be distracted by those who question whether you belong. Press forward no matter what, and you will make it. Finally, last year, I interviewed Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times Magazine writer Nikole Hannah-Jones on Washington Week. And I posed a question to her. I really just asked her, how are you doing with all of this? All that you've gone through, not only, of course, the 1619 Project and all of the criticism that she gets for the lies about the project, that of course is the project being so solid. I asked her, how did she just feel as a Black woman having to deal with all this? And her answer is one that I will cherish for a long time. She said, quote, "We are built for this. Our ancestors, everything that they endured, built us to do this work." I cherish those words. I think about those words. And I know that Martin Luther King, in some ways, that he was steadied by the hands of his ancestors, by the hands of the people that stood with him, his wife, his loved ones, his friends, his family, and of course, the beloved community that he was building. So I thank you so much again for inviting me to give this address. And I want to say happy Martin Luther King Day. This is a day, of course, of mourning for the loss of the life of Martin Luther King, but also, of course, a moment to celebrate his life and his legacy and all that he did to strive and to be an amazing part of American history. I feel honored that I could be part of this remembrance, this observance of the holiday, and I thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
Wow, this has been an amazing program in honor of the life and legacy of Dr. King. Thank you, Yamiche Alcindor, for the timely message for today. I would also like to thank our co-sponsors and for those who continue to donate to the Dr. King Scholarship Fund. Because of your generosity, we're able to keep the dream alive by providing financial resources for our students. UMSL transforms lives. You've heard from our students today that are realizing their dream through education and service. I ask that you consider donating to the UMSL Dr. King Scholarship Fund today. And we hope that you've enjoyed the celebration. I would like to congratulate our MLK Scholarship recipients, as well as thank our keynote speaker, our talented creative performance by our students under the direction of Professor Thompson, and our newest Triton, Tierra Marie Gray, for helping to make today's celebration extremely memorable. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the MLK Planning Committee, Executive Events, marketing and communications, and the team in the Two Hill Performing Arts Center. Without your hard work and dedication, this program would not have been possible today. And as is customary in our celebration, we will conclude the program with We Shall Overcome, sung by Miss Gray. As we come to the end of today's celebration, as Dr. King stated, and what was echoed from our guest speaker and by our students, faith can give us the courage to face the uncertainties of the future. It requires taking the first step, even when you cannot see the entire staircase. So tomorrow, I look forward to our rendezvous. On behalf of the University of Missouri-St. Louis, thank you once again for joining us this morning.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We are not alone. We are not alone. We are not alone today. Deep in my heart, I do believe we are not alone today. The truth will set us free. The truth will set us free. The truth will set us free someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe the truth will set us free someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome. We shall overcome.